Dad refused to walk me down aisle. Uncle did it, and Dad complained for years that nobody asked him to. My uncle's hand is warm and steady on my forearm, and I can feel my pulse thumping right where his fingers rest as the wedding coordinator whispers, 30 seconds, like she's announcing a weather warning instead of the moment I've been picturing since I was a kid. My dress is heavy in the humid back hallway. My bouquet is slipping because my palms are sweating, and somewhere on the other side of the doors I can hear my friends laughing a little too loudly in that nervous, excited way people get right before something big happens. I angle my head just enough to see into the room through the crack in the doors, and there he is, my dad, sitting in the second row with his arms folded, jaw clenched, staring straight ahead like he's at a dentist appointment. The photographer is floating around like a ghost, snapping details, and I'm standing here with Uncle Tony because my dad said no. Not I can't. Not I'm sorry. Just no. And the worst part is that the part of me that still wants him to suddenly stand up and change his mind is fighting with the part of me that wants to throw up. Uncle Tony leans closer and murmurs, "Hey, look at me for a sec." And I do, because if I look at my dad again, I'm going to either burst into tears or walk out and drive to a hotel and lock the door. Uncle Tony's eyes are kind, not pitying, and he squeezes my arm once like he's grounding me to the floor. "We're doing this," he says, quiet and certain. "You don't have to carry him right now. You just have to walk." I try to breathe, and it comes out weird like a hiccup. The coordinator lifts her hand, ready to cue the music, and behind me my mom's side of the family is lined up, dabbing at their eyes, smiling at me like everything is perfect. My throat burns. My chest feels too small for my lungs. I whisper, "He's going to make this about him forever." And Uncle Tony's mouth tightens in this sad, almost angry line. "Then let him," he whispers back. "He doesn't get to have today." The doors start to move, and the light from the room spills into the hallway, bright and unforgiving. I take Uncle Tony's arm, and my brain does this stupid thing where it flashes a memory of being 8 years old, standing on my dad's shoes while he taught me to dance in the living room. And the contrast hits me so hard my eyes sting. But the music swells and the guests stand, and my feet move because they have to, because if I freeze now, I'll never forgive myself. It was a Tuesday night 2 weeks before the wedding when my dad refused to walk me down the aisle, and I remember it so clearly because I was sitting on my kitchen floor surrounded by stupid little place cards and ribbon scraps. Try to tie bows that didn't look like crumpled napkins, and I've been feeling weirdly proud of how I was pulling it all together. I had my phone on speaker because I was multitasking, and I called him to confirm something simple. What time he wanted to arrive, whether he wanted to do photos before the ceremony, normal dad of the bride stuff. He didn't say hello. He just said, "I've been thinking," in that tone that always meant he'd already decided something, and I was about to be told why my feelings didn't matter. I laughed a little because I still thought it was going to be about parking or the suit. "Okay," I said. "About what?" There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm not doing it." I thought he meant he wasn't doing photos. "Not doing what?" I asked, and my stomach dipped in this premonition way. He exhaled like I was exhausting him. "Walking you," he said, "down the aisle." "I'm not doing it." And I sat there on my kitchen tiles with a ribbon in my lap, staring at nothing, because it felt like someone had tipped my whole world half an inch off level. I said, "Dad, what?" And he replied, "Don't start," like I was the one being dramatic. My relationship with my dad has always been conditional. He loves you when you fit inside the version of you he's built in his head. When you don't, he doesn't exactly stop loving you, but he punishes you until you come back in line. I didn't understand that as a kid. As a kid, it was just rules that changed without warning. If I got an A, he'd buy ice cream and tell everyone how smart I was. If I got a B, he'd lecture me for an hour about wasted potential and then act like I was invisible at dinner. If I cried, he'd say, "Stop putting on a show." If I got quiet, he'd say, "Oh, now you're sulking." There was no winning. There was only trying to anticipate what version of him you were going to get. When my parents divorced, I was 12. My mom left because she was tired of living in a house where the air felt like it could crack at any moment. Dad told everyone she gave up and that she poisoned me against him. I didn't understand adult relationships. but I understood tension. I understood my mom's shoulders finally unclenching when we moved into a small rental that smelled like fresh paint. Dad immediately started using access to him like currency. If I wanted him to come to something, a school event, a recital, anything, I had to earn it. If I did something he didn't like, he'd disappear. Sometimes, literally. He'd just not answer his phone for days, then reappear and act like I was unreasonable for being upset. "I'm busy," he'd say. "The world doesn't revolve around you." So I grew up learning how to perform stability. I learned how to present my life in a way that didn't trigger his disapproval. I learned to sand down anything in me that might seem too loud, too needy, too complicated. And yeah, I went to therapy later and realized that's a fantastic recipe for anxiety and people-pleasing and choosing partners who feel familiar in the worst way. But back then, it just felt like survival. When I met my fiancé, Noah, my dad didn't like him from the start. Not because Noah was a bad person. Noah is, genuinely, one of the kindest humans I've ever met. He's steady. He doesn't raise his voice. He does dishes without being asked. He's the guy who notices when my mom's hands shake a little from arthritis and quietly makes her a cup of tea without making a big deal out of it. Which, if you're normal, you'd think would be a selling point. But Noah isn't impressive in the way my dad values. He's a primary school teacher. He drives an old car because he refuses to get into debt for appearances. He doesn't play dominance games. He's not intimidated by my dad, but he also doesn't suck up to him. He's polite and firm and calm. My dad hates calm when it isn't his. My dad calls it passive-aggressive. At one dinner early on, Dad leaned back in his chair and said to Noah, "So what's the plan? Real career eventually? Or are you going to play teacher forever?" Noah blinked, then smiled politely and said, "I love what I do." Dad laughed like that was cute. "Love doesn't pay bills," he said, glancing at me like he was warning me. Noah replied, still calm, "We pay our bills fine." Dad's eyes narrowed. That was it. That was the moment he decided Noah wasn't going to be controllable. When Noah proposed, quietly, thoughtfully in my favorite park, just us, my dad found out through Facebook because I didn't call him fast enough. That was my first mistake. He rang me, furious. "So that's how I find out?" he demanded. I tried to explain, tried to soothe. He cut me off. "You always do this," he said. "You exclude me." As if I hadn't spent years contorting myself to keep him included in a life he only wanted to control. After that, wedding planning became another arena for him to fight in. He offered to pay for nothing, but wanted a say in everything. He wanted the ceremony in his church, even though I'm not religious anymore. He wanted to invite people I've never met because they watched you grow up. Translation: they know him. He wanted a father-daughter dance to a song he chose, not one that meant anything to me, because tradition matters. I tried to compromise at first. I really did. I told myself it's one day, keep the peace, it'll be easier. Every time I gave an inch, he took a mile and then complained that I wasn't grateful. The biggest fight was over my mom. My mom and dad cannot be in the same space without dad trying to turn it into a courtroom. Mom, to her credit, just wants to celebrate me and not get dragged into whatever scorekeeping game he's still playing. Dad demanded my mom be seated in the back because she doesn't deserve front row privileges. Those were his exact words, like my wedding was a stadium. I told him absolutely not. I told him Mom would be in the front row because she raised me. He said, "So she wins." I said, "This isn't a competition." He replied, "Everything is a competition." 2 days after that argument, he called me on that Tuesday night and said he wasn't walking me down the aisle. When I asked him why, he didn't give one clear reason. He gave a buffet of reasons, all of them laced with that righteous tone he uses when he wants to sound like the victim. He said, "I don't support this marriage." He said, "You're disrespecting me by having your mother front and center." He said, "You're making a mockery of tradition." He said, "If you can't honor your father, don't expect him to honor you." I remember sitting on my kitchen floor with my face hot, my hands shaking, trying so hard to keep my voice from cracking. "Dad," I said, "walking me down the aisle is not a prize you get for winning an argument. It's supposed to be about supporting me." There was a long pause, and then he said support is earned. Like love was a job interview. I hung up and stared at my place cards until the ink blurred. Noah found me like that, still on the floor, ribbon in my lap, just hollow. He sat down next to me, without speaking, and put his hand on my back. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there and felt this horrible relief mixed with grief, because a part of me had always known my dad would find a way to make my wedding about himself. I just didn't expect him to be that blatant. The next day, my dad texted me, "If you come to your senses, call me." No he paligi. No, imurt. Just a threat wrapped in dignity. Mom found out and immediately went into protective mode. She offered to walk me. She said she'd do whatever I needed. I love her for that, but I didn't want my wedding to become a symbolic battleground where my mom walking me would be interpreted as a statement against my dad. I didn't want the entire room thinking about my father's absence instead of my marriage. I wanted a day that wasn't about my family's dysfunction. That's when Uncle Tony stepped in. Uncle Tony is my mom's brother. He's the guy who picked me up from school when Mom got stuck at work. The guy who taught me how to change a tire. The guy who would slip me $20 when I was a broke uni student without making me feel ashamed. He's not flashy. He doesn't give speeches. He just shows up consistently, quietly, with love that doesn't feel like a test. When I called him, I didn't even get the words out properly. I said, "Tony, I, Dad," and my voice broke. Uncle Tony didn't ask for details. He just said, "Do you want me to do it?" Like it was the simplest thing in the world. When I started to say, "I don't want to put you in the middle," he cut me off gently. "You're not," he said. He put himself there. "I'm just standing where you need someone." We told the coordinator. We adjusted the lineup. We didn't announce anything dramatic. We didn't put a spotlight on it. We just adapted because that's what healthy people do. And in the days leading up to the wedding, I kept waiting for my dad to call back and change his mind. He didn't. He stayed silent like he was punishing me, like the absence would teach me a lesson. Then the day came. The hallway. The doors. Uncle Tony's hand on my arm. My dad in the second row, arms folded, refusing to look at me, refusing to be the father in the moment he'd spent my entire life insisting he was entitled to. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Not perfect, beautiful. Noah cried when he saw me. Like actual tears, no shame, just emotion. My friends held my train and whispered that I looked amazing. Mom held my hands before I walked out and said, "I'm here," and I believed her. Uncle Tony walked me down with a steady pace and a quiet smile, and I felt this strange surge of gratitude, so strong it almost knocked the anger out of me for a second. The guests smiled. The music swelled. Noah's hand shook when he took mine. I remember thinking, this is what matters. Not my dad's tantrum. I did glance at my dad once, because I'm human and I still wanted him to meet my eyes, to soften, to show some kind of remorse. He didn't. He stared straight ahead like a martyr. After the ceremony, he didn't come to the family photos. He didn't approach me. He left after dinner without saying goodbye. Mom told me later he walked past her and muttered, "Enjoy your victory," like my wedding was a war she'd won. Mom said nothing. She just watched him go, because at that point she'd been divorced from him long enough to know engagement only feeds the performance. For about a year, my dad pretended my wedding hadn't happened. He didn't ask about Noah. He didn't ask about married life. He sent birthday texts like, "Hope you're well," and nothing else. I thought maybe, naively, that he was embarrassed, that he realized refusing to walk his daughter down the aisle made him look petty, that he would quietly let it go because there was no way to spin it without looking awful. Then the complaining started. It began at my cousin's barbecue. Dad showed up because there were people there he wanted to impress. He barely spoke to me, but I overheard him near the drinks esquissing, "I didn't even get to walk my own daughter down the aisle." Nobody asked me. He said it with that wounded tone, like it was something that happened to him, like he'd been robbed. I felt my whole body go hot. Noah, who was standing beside me, stiffened. I could tell he wanted to say something, but he looked at me for a cue. My hands were shaking around my plastic cup. I walked up to Dad and said, very quietly, "You were asked." He blinked at me like I'd interrupted a monologue. "What?" he said. "You were asked?" I repeated. 2 weeks before the wedding. "And you said no." His expression shifted instantly into indignation. "That's not what happened," he said, loud enough for the people around to hear. "Don't twist things." I was never asked properly. You just did your own thing. I stared at him. Properly? I said. What does that mean? I called you and asked you to walk me. You refused because Mom was in the front row. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing on anger. I refused because you disrespected me, he said. And then you didn't even come back and ask again. You didn't fight for me. There it was. The rule. The test. The idea that love means proving you'll chase him no matter how cruel he is. Proving you'll beg. I felt something inside me snap into a kind of clarity that was almost peaceful. I'm not going to beg you to be my dad, I said, and my voice was steady, which shocked me. I asked. You declined. That was your choice. He shook his head like I was disappointing him. You always have to make me the bad guy, he said. Do you know how humiliating it was watching your uncle do that in front of everyone? I laughed once sharp. You mean the uncle who showed up when you refused? I said. Yeah, I can imagine that was uncomfortable. Dad leaned in, voice lower, dangerous. Watch your mouth, he said. Noah stepped closer, not aggressive, just present. Dad's eyes flicked to him with contempt. Oh, here we go, Dad sneered. Your little hero. That was the first time I realized my dad wasn't going to let time soften this. He was going to rewrite it forever, because admitting he refused would mean admitting he hurt me on purpose. And he can't live in a world where he's wrong. So instead, he lives in a world where he's a victim of my cruelty. It's easier for him. It costs him nothing. It cost me everything. After that barbecue, it became a recurring story he told at family gatherings, at dinners, even once at my grandmother's birthday. I never got to walk her, he'd say with a sigh, shaking his head like it was tragedy. People would make sympathetic noises. Some would look at me like I was cold. My mom would grit her teeth. Uncle Tony would go quiet, uncomfortable, because he hates conflict and he hates being used as a prop in someone else's narrative. Noah would squeeze my knee under the table, so hard it almost hurt, like he was holding me down so I didn't explode. The breaking point came 3 years after the wedding, at my niece's christening lunch. Dad was holding court at the end of the table, telling his favorite story again. You know, he said, a father dreams of that moment, walking his daughter. And I didn't get it. Nobody asked me. He glanced at me when he said nobody, like he was daring me to contradict him. Something in me rose up, this combination of exhaustion and anger and, honestly, grief. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly. The room went quiet in that instant way it does when everyone senses a scene coming. My hands were shaking. My throat felt like it was closing. I said, stop saying that. Dad's eyebrows lifted, offended. Stop saying what? He asked too innocently. Stop saying nobody asked you. I said, and my voice wobbled, but I kept going. I asked you. I called you. 2 weeks before my wedding. And you refused. You refused because you wanted me to punish Mom for leaving you. You refused because you wanted me to beg. You refused because you wanted control. And I will not sit here and listen to you rewrite it like I took something from you. The silence was so thick I could hear someone's fork tap a plate. My cousin's kids started babbling, and someone shushed him quickly like even the baby needed to be quiet for this. Dad's face went red, then pale, then red again. How dare you, he said, voice shaking now, not with sadness, with rage. You're lying. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for years. I'm not, I said, and I'm done being your scapegoat so you can look like a good man in public. Mom's eyes were glossy. Uncle Tony stared at his hands. Noah was standing now too, close behind me, a quiet support on my back. Dad pointed at me like I was a misbehaving child. You embarrassed me, he said. No, I said. You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering it. He looked around the table, searching for allies. Some people avoided his gaze. Some looked uncomfortable. One had started to speak. Maybe everyone just calmed down, but I cut her off without looking at her. No, I said again, quieter this time. I'm not calming down so he can keep doing this. Dad's mouth opened and closed like he had a speech prepared, but the room wasn't cooperating. Finally, he spat. Fine. If that's how you feel, don't expect anything from me. I blinked because the threat was so familiar it almost felt like a childhood flashback. Don't expect anything. As if I still did. I don't, I said simply. That landed like a slap. Dad stared at me, stunned, because he's used to that line working. He's used to it making people scramble to repair things. He's used to being chased. I didn't chase. I sat back down, my legs trembling under the table, and I picked up my glass of water and took a sip even though my mouth was dry. My hand shook so much the water rippled. Noah put his hand on my thigh under the table, grounding me. Uncle Tony finally looked up and met my eyes for a second, and in that look there was so much pride, sadness, relief. Dad left 10 minutes later, loudly, pushing his chair back, muttering about disrespect, making sure everyone saw him storm out. He wanted the last theatrical note. Let him have it. After that, things changed. Not overnight, not magically, but the story stopped being his uncontested narrative. People who'd heard him complain for years started quietly asking me, did he really refuse? And for once, I told the truth without shrinking it. Mom stopped trying to mediate. Uncle Tony stopped looking guilty. Noah stopped clenching his jaw at every family gathering because the elephant wasn't sitting on the table anymore. It had been acknowledged. My dad, of course, didn't apologize. He never will. He sent me a text weeks later that said, I hope you're happy. Like my happiness was revenge. Like my boundaries were punishment. I didn't respond. Because here's the thing, I got married. I built a life with someone who shows up. I have a home that feels safe. I have dinners that aren't tense. I have holidays that don't revolve around managing one man's mood. And my dad is still telling anyone who will listen that nobody asked him to walk me. He's still polishing his grievance like it's a medal. If I let myself, I can get stuck in the sadness of that. The little girl in me still wants her dad to choose her. Still wants him to say, I'm sorry I hurt you. Still wants him to sit in a room and not make it about control. But I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm the woman who stood in a bright hallway, bouquet slipping, heart pounding, and took her uncle's arm and walked anyway. I'm the woman who didn't let her father's refusal steal her wedding. I'm the woman who finally said out loud, in front of witnesses, that his story is a lie. And yes, he complained for years that nobody asked him to. He complained like he was robbed. He complained like he was the victim of my choices, not the author of his own. But the truth is simple, and it's the truth I come back to whenever the guilt tries to creep in. I asked. He refused. Uncle Tony stepped up. And my dad can rewrite all he wants. He can build a whole mythology around how he was wronged. But he can't change the fact that he chose pride over me, and I chose to walk anyway.